Welcome to Entrepreneurship Hour, Entrepreneurship 407. It's great to have you here this afternoon. I'm really delighted. We have a great guest here, Dawn White, and a great person. He's been introduced to me through a number of the entrepreneurial community here in Ann Arbor. My colleague, Katie Abdu, who's here. Thomas Serbukin, who many of you may know about or know personally, sits on an advisory board of one of our companies. Dawn is a serial entrepreneur. What that means is she's started more than one company and is constantly innovating and doing innovation. And she's been doing it here in the state of Michigan and in the city of Ann Arbor. One of her first companies was called Solidica, and that company did very well. And the company that she's recently co-founded and is also taking off is in the alternative energy space, and it's called Aki Energy. How many of you have seen Harry Potter? Heard of the Accio spell? I'm not sure as it's pronounced that in the movies, but it's A-C-C-I-O. It means to summon an object from far away. This is pretty much the basis of this company, but I'll let Dawn share the rest. Would you join me in welcoming Dawn White?
Thanks very much, Dave, and thank you all for coming out to hear what I have to say. So I was wondering how I got here, because my perception is that most of the people you have here have been probably more wildly successful than me. But I've had a lot of fun and done some interesting things, and I'm kind of here to share with you how I ended up standing here today talking to you. So first, like you, I got an education, right? And I got it at one of those other Big Ten schools, so you can all boo now and get it over with. And I'm really a materials scientist at heart, but I did a PhD in mechanical engineering as well, which has come in handy at various times. When I was an undergraduate, and a graduate student for that matter, really nobody ever taught you anything about entrepreneurship. In fact, I don't think that the word entrepreneur was probably ever uttered in the entire engineering college, maybe once a year. That's how long ago that was. And everybody, however, did expect that what you would do is you would go to work, since I was from Illinois, you'd go to work at Caterpillar. Here you would go to work at GM or Ford. And in fact, I did actually go to work at Caterpillar for a couple of summers, and then I decided I was going to go back to graduate school, although I really learned some wonderful things there that informed a lot of my graduate education decisions. But then while I was in grad school, they had an Army lab. The Corps of Engineers ran a laboratory, a construction engineering laboratory in Champaign, still do. And they said, you know, if you want to come here, you can make 4 times as much money and we'll pay for you to do your PhD as well. So since graduate students then didn't make any more money than they make now, 4 times as much money sounded pretty good. So I went over there, and I was supposed to be a research metallurgist, but they said, poof, you're a welding engineer. And at the time, I wasn't too excited about that, but actually that turned out to be a really great thing for me, because it's a really, joining science is a really interesting field of research and engineering, and it actually was really undergirded everything I did for a long time in my career thereafter. So I finished my PhD while I was working for the Army, and even did some sort of intrapreneurial things there, some technologies that I developed as part of my thesis topic, wound up being commercialized by welding and joining companies, and also by a manufacturing company that used it on their assembly line. But when I finished up, I decided I wanted to go someplace else. So I moved to Minneapolis and kind of leveraged what I was doing in the welding field on my PhD into work on advanced manufacturing in general. And my job there really was to figure out how to take all the different core competencies that they had in this division of the company that hired me, it was their advanced technology division, and figure out how they could expand their book of business by bidding on contract R&D programs that use their core technologies, which was kind of a tall order coming right out of my PhD program to sort of be an application engineer who was supposed to figure out how to keep 20 people working. But it was definitely a requirement to be an intrapreneur, so I looked at what they were doing and figured out a way to create a lot of interesting business doing advanced joining science, really advanced welding and spray forming and things like that. and generated probably, you know, $12 or $15 million worth of business for them in the 6 years I was there. Then I was living in Minnesota, and I decided I needed some better weather, so I went down here to go to work for Ford. No. What's the good thing about living in Minnesota? It makes Michigan weather look great. And I still think about that on weeks like last week. So when I went to Ford, I started out there working in welding and joining, but at that time that was right at the beginning of the additive manufacturing thing, and I actually got involved in first rapid prototyping and then rapid tooling, and so I built a whole group and activity and got a big lab going, and actually bought a company from the UK and brought their people and their technology back to Ford, and then we transferred that into production. So that was my sort of second experience in entrepreneuring. And I also learned there that I was an inventor, because nobody at the Army or at MTS really cared about patents, but I managed to do some pretty cool invention things at Ford. Did some work for the glass plant, did some work for the body line, did some work on rapid tooling, and discovered that I had an ability to innovate in technology, and that was really a lot of fun. So I had this great idea about additive manufacturing at the time, and I realized it was going to be a vendor technology at Ford, so I thought, well, I'll just become a vendor. And that was when I jumped that little gap there from being an intrapreneur to being an entrepreneur. I started Silica, where we worked on solid-state additive manufacturing technology. So most additive manufacturing technologies require you to take something that's a liquid and turn it into a solid. And so anybody who actually works in joining technology or science knows that the most complicated and difficult to control part of these processes is actually solidification. And so it's where all your defects and all your dimensional inaccuracies and pretty much all the bad things that can possibly happen occur. So being a lazy kind of material scientist, I thought, let's do a solid state process and get rid of all those problems and make life easier. And that's what we did at Silica. And then a few years ago, I left Silica and decided I was going to get into a new kind of wind energy technology. And I'll tell you about that later, and that was Aki Energy. So that's sort of my hopscotch past and the background that I have that brought me here today. So let's talk a little bit about entrepreneuring, because not everybody in this room may discover that startup world is exactly where they want to be. But there are a lot of opportunities to be innovative working in medium and large size organizations. Sometimes it feels hard because there's a lot of stuff already going on and you may have to sell your innovation. But what's an entrepreneur? It's a person who actually really focuses on kind of entrepreneurial types of innovation inside of a bigger organization as an employee. So it's nice because you're not at any risk of not having a paycheck, which is a big risk that you have in startup world, right? So you might be an entrepreneur if you spend a lot of time thinking about, I'd really rather be solving a different problem than the one that they hired me for. Or what if, and then if you can do those things or enjoy doing those things and you can create a value proposition and sell it to your management, that makes you an entrepreneur. And so I very successfully, entrepreneured in 3 different organizations, and one of them a government lab where there's really no motivation, financial motivation there. Another one where my job actually depended on me being an entrepreneur and generating money, because my boss, when he hired me, had actually fired the guy he'd had in that job before me because he wasn't bringing home the money. So that focuses your attention. And at Ford, that's probably the hardest place because there's so much else going on. But even there, you have a great value proposition. You can sell it to management. So, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship aren't exactly the same. So here's how I think about it. Entrepreneurship is a little bit like trying to blow up a balloon in a lot of, several hundred feet of water. So here's this poor guy with a scuba tank, and he's got his balloon, and it's all squished because a lot of water pressure out there. He's got plenty of resources, got a big tank there, and there's no room to blow anything up in the organization. Entrepreneurship, on the other hand, is a lot like trying to blow up that balloon in outer space. There's no resistance, but there's no resources either. So really and truly, why is that, right? Well, it's because large companies, they excel at reducing execution risk, right? Large companies are all about process leadership, successful launches, and a culture of avoiding failure, because failures are really expensive. And you know, they're on these quarter by quarter plans, and Wall Street's watching them, and so you can see why they have these motivations. Startups, on the other hand, had better be expert at reducing technical and business model risk, because if you're not, you're out of business in a hurry. So you better be good at prototyping, failing faster, and proving concepts. So it really, you know, whether you're an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur, both of these things are fun to do, I can tell you that. And a lot of it depends on, you know, what your skills are, you know, what your personal appetite for risk is, you know, and what opportunities present themselves to you, right? There were very few opportunities when I was, you know, at your point in my career to, you know, say, I think I'll be an entrepreneur. It was just not even on the landscape of possibilities that presented themselves to me. So let's talk for a minute about additive manufacturing, which is what I did at Solidica, because right now it's having its second 15 minutes of fame. And the last one was back in the 1990s, and you guys probably don't remember that, but I was actually working on it in the 1990s. And at that time, when we were all the way back here on this little, I actually took an old chart here and I shrunk it down to match this one so that they would be kind of at scale, right? So this is the size that the industry has been, and this is where people are projecting it to go, and these are actually to scale. So, but back in the early 90s, everybody was sure on that first upward trajectory there that this was going to become the big, big thing, and that this business was going to grow right from there into a big hockey stick instead of kind of flattening out. And now people are saying, oh, it's going to... Now, it does seem that actually the business will almost double between 2012 and 2013 results. It's TBD if all the rest of this will happen. What are the barriers to that happening? Well, the great news is that the equipment that's available, the size that's available in, the reliability of that equipment, and the software tools for creating files and sending it up there has radically improved, you know, in just the last few years. And so this is incredibly helpful. And the number of people who are, you know, looking at even modest CAD tools like SketchUp and things like that, and the tools for actually being able to go and do your own stuff, so many more people have access to this technology and an interest in using it. On the other hand, there's still a very limited number of materials that you can use, and there's a very poor database for what the mechanical behavior of those materials actually are going to be in a real engineering application. They also, I remember I was telling you how the hardest part of all this is turning things from liquids to solids. They're also mostly these liquid-solid processes, and there's actually a very specific limitation. It's a physics-based limitation on how accurate the geometry is going to be when you're done. A very smart guy by the name of Paul Jacobs worked on this in the 90s and analyzed this in detail. And then because your surface is never going to be any more accurate than the coarsest powder you're building something on, or the coarsest line you're building with. So, you know, most of these things, like these jet engine nozzles you hear about from GE, all require finished machining. So you're still not taking it right out of that thing and sticking it in your high-performance article. On the other hand, you know, there's a huge future for this because, you know, every day banks do trillions of transactions, but you love your ATM. You know, Miller and Coors and all those other guys are producing beer by the truckload, but we all love our craft brews. You know, printing is done on a huge scale, at least until the internet finally kills it off, but we still have our personal printers. And when you go to manufacturing, there are still going to be things where you're price sensitive and you want a lot of content and you want high volumes like cars, where this technology is not going to make sense, at least not for a long time yet. But if you want the low volume thing, like those jet engine nozzles, or you can, you know, send your picture to somebody and they'll make your very own Pez dispenser. So there's personal objects that we're willing to pay for. I was showing a colleague these slides, and he's like, that would be a great bar mitzvah present for my son. So I think I sold some of those this morning. But so there's room in the business for all of these technologies, right? So what's next in additive manufacturing? Well, I just want to make a couple of comments. You know, first of all, remember that you and I are products of additive manufacturing, and we live in a world that's a product of additive manufacturing. And it's a wonderful world, but it's really not very dimensionally deterministic, right? Oak trees come in, you can recognize every oak tree as an oak tree, but none of them are exactly the same. And it's a lot easier to dissipate power with that waterfall than it is, by Mother Nature can do that, but you have to build a pretty specialized hydroelectric dam to turn that into power, right? So it's dissipating energy there, you're making power here. I got 1 horsepower in that horse, and I happen to love horses. I keep them in my backyard, but my husband is a lot more interested in that hundreds of horsepower on the next picture down. He keeps those in his garage. And so, you know, humans kind of had to be invented in order to invent subtractive processes that allow you to make things that are deterministic, precise, repeatable, and smooth. Those are little pollen things, and they look a lot alike, but if you look closely, they're all different in subtle ways. These are actually the first time they found gears that were made in nature. They're gears that help a larval insect jump. So these are really cool. They actually work, which is sort of astonishing, and it's astonishing that they evolved. But they move something that weighs in milligrams, right? Trust me, you're not going to use those methods to make the gears that move that thing off the, you know, if you're trying to get down the track, right? So the big question, I think, for additive manufacturing in the really long run is, can you develop additive methods that actually can overcome this problem, or can you develop engineering designs that overcome the problem that things have to be deterministic, precise, and smooth? So there's 2 ways to solve it, right? You either fix the process or you fix the designs. So I'm hoping NSF will watch this video and decide to start a program on that. So I'm a CTO, right? A Chief Technology Officer. I'm not a CEO. I have been a CEO. And it's worth talking a little bit about roles, because some of you may have aspirations to be a CEO, but not everybody is actually good at that job. Not everybody has the opportunity to have that job. And being a CTO, especially if you're an engineer, sometimes it's more fun. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the roles and a little bit about communication. So the CEO looks at other people. This is a joke. Don't be offended, you guys. And they deal with the investors and the boards. They're doing fundraising. They're working on the environment for the fundraising, milestones, the team, stuff like that, right? What does the CTO do? The CTO looks at other people's feet. You're an extroverted engineer, right? Basically what I am, I'm the translator and the filter between the team and the board and the investors, right? I develop technical strategy and I create the technical value proposition. And I got my engineering team, right? And they're looking inside their team, right? This is not meant to be rude. But they're looking inside their team, right? And the team is working really hard on the tactics to meet the milestones, the engineering innovations to meet all of our goals and execution. So I've had all these jobs, by the way, and they're all interesting. And I would probably say that the one I have right now is probably the most fun. And what is CTO communication all about? So you remember, your board of directors isn't actually interested in your operations. They're interested in governance, making sure you're not wasting the investors' money. So for you're a CTO, you have to be able to communicate outward and inward. So down here on that blue line, here's what's actually happening in your company, right? This is the progress that you're making. Out there, that green line, that's what you're talking about. Always. So if my internal conversation is, oh my God, terrible things are happening, we don't know exactly what to do, we got to get a workaround, we got to design and build and test new hardware, But up here, hey, the new test data looks good, everything's fine, it's wonderful, because your board, your investors, and your customers only want to see that beautiful water lily on top of the pond, when in fact underneath it is that squelchy, oozy, disgusting mass of mud and algae and bugs and frogs, snakes, right? So you're always down there saying, no, don't look down there, look up here at that beautiful lily, right? That's your job. You have to be good at both those things, though. You got to be able to deal with both of them. So Aki Energy, what makes Aki so cool? Why am I so excited about it? Aki is so cool because we get rid of the thing that does this and all the annoyances and problems that go with it, and we have this amazing value proposition associated with manufacturing technology, which is a cool thing to be doing right here in Southeast Michigan. How does this work? You take modular wind permeable panels and you assemble them into an arbitrary size. Each one of these emits a modest amount of charged water. It does not have to be potable water. It can be gray water, seawater, and in little tiny droplets, right? So it makes a little mist of droplets. Where's my droplet? Oh, there they are. So It makes a bunch of little positively charged droplets, and the wind separates them from the source. Well, every time you do that, it has to leave an electron behind, right? So if you have enough positive charges being blown away, a lot of electrons get built up on the source side, and those electrons create potential energy, and that's actually what we use as a generator. And we draw that off as a high voltage direct current. And that's all it is, right? It's very simple in principle. It's insanely complicated in practice, which is why even though people worked on it 30, 40 years ago, they couldn't make it work, but that's what our big breakthrough has been. So it's hard to brand electrons, really, it turns out. And so power energy business is all about cost, right? Yes, Google talks and you know, Facebook talk about how they're buying energy from wind farms and IKEA, but really, truly, you still have to be able to get your price down. So what's great about Aki's technology is we have the ability to drive the cost of wind energy, especially offshore, where there's lots of wind and lots of water, down to below the cost of onshore wind and down even to natural gas. And so that's our real big goal. Why? Okay, well, because building a wind turbine is like making an airplane. It's like huge, you know, casting, huge magnets, huge copper windings, huge gears, ginormous blades that are 180 feet long, great big towers. And all those things have to be made with automotive heritage technology, and they're kind of fragile, and they have to be towers have to be rigid. There's a lot of cost that goes into all that. And every time you want a new product, you've got to design the whole new thing. So our thing, you design one panel, and it's made out of really simple materials. I want to make it out of recycled pop cans, and really standard engineering materials. And I want to use manufacturing technologies like roll forming, extruding, and stamping, and that we use, know how to do right here in very high volumes. Because if you can do that, you can make it for nearly nothing, and create great jobs and bring them back here to Michigan. And also, if you've ever watched a wind turbine go down the road on a truck, it's a nightmare, right? And when they try to install these things offshore in the ocean, it's even a bigger nightmare. You need a whole ship that jacks up to the bottom. But this stuff can go in standard containers. You can ship them on trucks and on trains, and you can deploy them off a container ship. So all these things enable you to really, really reduce the cost, because you make one thing, you make it over and over, your NRE goes down, your turbine, it fails, the turbine's down, you can't do anything with it. Fly a helicopter out there. If one panel goes down out of 200, well, you wait for 20 of them to go down, and then you repair it because your multi-million-dollar asset is still producing. So this is our, why we're so much cheaper. And so that's our value proposition, right? Is we tell people you can have a lower unsubsidized cost, you can have a higher capacity factor. These turbines have a huge amount of mass inertia, so it's hard to get them going, and then if wind speeds are varying, it's hard to get them to adapt. On this thing, I can use a little, microcontroller the size of your phone, and we can change the amount of water and charge coming out of it 5 times a second if we want. Improved sighting, you can see through it. It doesn't go around, it doesn't cause problems, it doesn't kill birds, it's radar compatible. So you don't have the objections that people have to turbines. It's modular, and you can put them closer together. Turbines have to be put a long ways apart from each other because a lot of downwind turbulence, and if the downwind turbulence buffets the next one in line, it'll damage those, the gears and the hubs. So you can have a lot more of them in one place. So that's our value proposition. And it all rests on this idea of this manufacturable, modular, scalable technology. So what are our goals for 2014? Well, we have 3 patents. Yay, this is exciting. And we have 6 or 7 more of them that are out there being looked at, and we're hoping to get 2 or 3 more of them issued this year. We're going to do some meaningful outdoor tests that demonstrate our modularity and output, and we're going to double our current power density. So this is a lot of communicating, right? Last year I had one thing I had to do. I had to get to 40 watts per square meter. So that was a lot of communicating, as it was. This year, my big challenge as a CTO is, how do I communicate these, twice as many goals, basically? How do we create this outdoor demonstration? How do we solve some of our engineering problems associated with actually increasing power density, and how we hit all these milestones? But I have a great team. So all those people who are looking at their own feet make it possible for me to do my job. And I'm super excited about it. So there you go.
Dawn, thank you for being here. This is really tremendous. It's interesting. So half of our class are engineers, and half our class are not. So when you start talking about metallurgical engineering and material science, it's sometimes hard to fully grasp the impact that has in our daily lives, day to day, minute by minute. But seeing this, it's a remarkable demonstration of that. I mean, you are fundamentally attacking a larger problem, though, which is climate change and trying to address that by providing an alternative energy source. Where did this idea generate from, and how did you become a part of that big question?
So this is back in 2007. I was actually thinking what I wanted to do next, and I was working with a guy who helped me actually design Solidicus product, and he was interested in doing something in renewable energy, and I said, well, that'd be fun to do a renewable energy thing together. And we looked at a whole bunch of ideas, and they were all not that great. And then one day he called me up and said, you know, I was driving home from Jackson from my daughter's soccer game last night, and I was watching the wind blow the snowflakes against the car window, and I thought you could make wind energy that way, because look at the big drag cross-section
This is a normal thing we all do, right?
Right. all the geeky engineers, I'm sure that everybody who's not an engineer in the room is now falling asleep. But he said, you know, you could actually make wind that way. And then I went home and I looked it up in my college physics book. Like,
wow.
Really? This is way geekier than me, because I do not still have my college physics books. I'm here to tell you all that.
They're by his bedside table. Yeah.
That's right. Well, actually, they probably were.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he said, and I looked it up and I discovered that you could make wind energy that way. And then I went to the US PTO website and I saw that people had tried it in the past.
But not commercialized.
But not commercialized it.
Right.
Right. And I was like, okay, David, well, why don't you come explain it to me? And I mean, he explained it like 6 times probably, because this is so non-intuitive. I mean, everybody says, how does that work again?
So my understanding, this conversation actually took place at Zingerman's.
Yeah.
So I mean, this gets real, right? I mean, big time business solving a big time problem. It started at Zingerman's.
There you go.
But the process is both complex and simple, right? I mean, it's complex insofar as it's completely new, but when you get down to the sort of electron level, basically what's happening is you're creating an electric charge. Mm-hmm. Wind is doing half the work for you, blowing off those positive charges, and then the question is, how do you harvest that negative charge for energy and store it and distribute it, right?
Well, so it turns out that the biggest problem with harvesting the energy is that this is a high voltage direct current generator, and you know, most of our grid is AC, and you know, its distribution and transmission occur at very different voltages. So, and actually, though, this is in some ways the energy source of the future, because if you look at where transmission in particular is going, people are installing more and more high voltage DC transmission because the losses are lower. And a lot of the advanced work that's going on in switches for this, and some of the work that they're doing like at ARPA-E and the Department of Energy, are all on switches to make these high voltage direct current systems work better. And one of the great things about this is, if you're building an offshore wind farm today, you had to build a whole substation out there, right? Building a substation in 5 miles of ocean is not an easy thing. It costs $1 a watt for all the generation you're doing at your wind farm, to take what comes off that turbine and turn it into high voltage DC to send it to the beach. And so part of our value proposition is, you don't have to spend all that money on that.
Right.
With this technology.
Or necessarily get government subsidies to do it, right?
Right. So there are these really interesting pieces to that. But yeah, in principle, it's very simple. In actual fact, a big part of this problem is electric fields. You know, for all of you who are engineers and suffered through electricity and magnetism, which certainly gave me headaches when I was an undergraduate, you know, electric fields aren't straight, right? They're going everywhere. You know, that whole right-hand rule and left-hand rule. And so for us, our big challenge is to smooth them out so that things go where they're supposed to go. That's our big thing.
So it's interesting to me, because you grew up, or at least part of the time, in Sweden, mm-hmm. and IKEA comes from Sweden, and they're about design, and so you know, seeing your discussion about design, that is one of the challenging things about these wind farms too, right? I mean, they take an enormous amount of space and they don't actually look that great.
Yeah.
And it causes some community backlash about where do we put these things. What you're showing here actually looks a little bit better and smoother and sleeker.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I forgot it. See? You're going to be able to see through it.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of the value prop, I mean, that one's immediately evident. And the other thing is, we're sitting here in the state of Michigan. You were alluding to Michigan being an important aspect of the business. It's going to require quite a bit to produce the number that you need to actually make a dent in the overall energy need.
Right.
Going back to the big problem. How does the state of Michigan and its sort of manufacturing capacity help you sort of leverage and scale?
Well, so a couple things. First of all, I'll give you my latest soundbite that I've developed that somebody on my team will steal and tell investors when I'll have to make up a new one. But think about those turbines, and think about those 150-foot or 170-foot long blades. Think about these, the nacelle that weighs literally, thousands and thousands of tons, tens of thousands of tons. And think about the time it takes to manufacture that, right? Okay, now just give some thought to this. You can go down to Michigan Truck, which is just down the road, 20 miles or so, down in Wayne, Michigan, and they make 1,500 trucks a day there. So my panel product is going to be about 20 feet long and about 10 feet high, and that's going to make maybe 2 or 3 kilowatts. I figure I can make 4,000 of those a day because they're much simpler than making that whole truck, right? It's like making kind of an extra big truck frame and maybe some wiring harnesses. So if I can make 4,000 of those a day in a plant the size of Michigan Assembly, which I'm pretty sure is possible because I used to work at Ford.
Previous background coming to play here.
Right,
in your entrepreneurial
exactly,
story, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
right. That means I can make 12 megawatts of wind energy capacity in one plant in one day here in Michigan versus 3.5 megawatt turbines. And I promise you, you're not going to make 3.5 megawatt turbines in one day.
Right.
You can't do it.
Right.
So that's where the fact that we have all these people, we have underutilized people still, we have underutilized plants, we have the whole supply chain for the steel and all of the stock goods that have to come in, and the people who know how to lay these plants out and operate them. And so for me, one of the things that's always excited me about this idea was that it was a great way to put people back to work here and also to create exports and do a lot of things that drive our economy, but do them in a way that's going to create a cleaner environment and a better world.
So it's really, so the big idea is climate change, but also transforming the economy here in the state of Michigan. And speaking of the exports, I mean, what do you see the long-term growth potential for something like this? I mean, it's not just a domestic opportunity.
No,
right?
in fact, in some respects, probably it's a bigger opportunity offshore, and the reason, or not, well, offshore wind, but also out of the U.S., outside, because one thing that everybody in the energy business today is contending with is the fact that the marginal cost of natural gas right now is approaching zero in this country, and so everybody's going to natural gas, and you have to compete with natural gas on price. But, natural gas isn't that cheap anyplace else in the world, right? And so offshore, in other countries, there's a lot of population density, so there's not that many places in Europe to put wind turbines. They're closer to people everywhere. There's really great offshore resources. This is true of a lot of other countries as well, places that are trying to electrify and provide electricity to more of their countries and more of their people. And they have very high fuel costs too. So we see this as a great opportunity to go places where this could really be the lowest cost provider, and there is no competition with natural gas, which is sort of a distortion in the market here.
So what is the role? One of the interesting things about your previous company is the extent to which government actually made investments in the growth of Solidica. Here with Akio, what is the role of government in sort of defining the regulatory environment for doing this, first of all, and providing resources to sort of scale this? Both here and internationally?
So the regulatory environment for energy it's complicated, and especially for wind energy, it's extremely erratic, right? Sometimes they have PTCs, sometimes they don't have PTCs. And so one of the things we've always said at Akio is we want to create a product that will be cheapest on unsubsidized basis. So if you were to go back and look at this slide back here, what you'd see is it says unsubsidized cost of energy up there.
Yeah.
So we create our value proposition on the idea that you don't have to have a PTC in order for this to make sense for you.
It's good.
Yeah, especially because a lot of places in other countries do have subsidies, so it's even more favorable there. So that's one part of it. With regard to where our financing came from, the company has got about 70% of the money that's gone into the company has been raised by from private investors, angels, almost all of them here in Michigan, and a couple of, well, one small venture fund here in Ann Arbor, Resonant.
Resonant.
Resonant,
okay, yes.
right. And so that's where most of the money came from. The state of Michigan, during the Grant Home Administration, had a program from the Michigan Public Service Commission. We got some money from that, and we've gotten a small amount of funding from federal government sources. But you know, the environment for any kind of funding for early stage pre-commercial R&D is really tough in the last few years, and so that puts a lot of, you know, pressure on your entrepreneurs to really get your game on, and especially if you're working on sort of, you know, tough technology problems. You know, you really have to step up and meet the technical challenge and do it as effectively as you can. I think our team at Aki has actually been really good at that.
Well, I want to give a few minutes for the students to ask a couple questions. What you've been doing, both with Solidica and Accio, is pretty tremendous. It's been picked up on the Wall Street Journal and a lot of other places. And so I want to give them a chance to sort of ask you what it's like to be an entrepreneur here in Ann Arbor, and any more technical questions. We have some mics.
So obviously you've done a lot of different things, and I was kind of wondering, when do you decide it's the right time to move on, whether it's your interest level, involvement level, or any other factors that may contribute to that decision?
Wow, that's a great question. I actually really am not sure I have as good an answer as you have a question. I discover I have sort of career attention deficit disorder. So like
Is that a technical term? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, it is now.
And so it seems like every 6 or 7 years, I have to find something new to do, whether I like it or not. So I think, and my goal, if I had to go do it all over, would be to like cycle through things a little faster and be more proactive in thinking about that. But I think, you know, because yeah, you're tired of what you're doing, and you start looking at other ideas and other technologies and thinking, what if I was doing that instead of what I'm doing? And, you know, this idea that you're going to have one career, of course, is long since gone. I mean, I guess I've had about 6 of them now, and I highly recommend always trying to grow into, you know, don't grow out of something, but grow into something, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for coming in. So my question is actually about some of the more technical aspects of your technology. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, because you mentioned using it for offshore applications. Mm-hmm. Would you be pumping like salt water up into the modules? And then if so, how would you prevent salt from like building up on the material itself as the water?
Those are really excellent questions. So, well, one thing is you make sure you're, you know, have a constant flow, and then if you're not consistently flowing, you have a good drain. I expect that we're going to have to look a lot at specialty coatings, especially, you know, coatings that are, and also the way we make droplets, I expect is going to involve some technologies that are sort of going to work against buildup of stuff. That there's some, I can't kind of go into the details, but I think some of the things that we're doing now are going to kind of help with that.
Thank you.
I mean, this is a real example where the material science is meeting
Right.
the mechanical engineering background. I mean, this is great.
It's a material science problem for sure.
Yeah. So, anyone, we got a question up here.
I actually was been talking to Max Stein about some of these coatings and some of these things, because he's always up on really cool surface technology.
And Max Stein, of course, is a faculty member here at the College of Engineering.
Hi, my name is Colin. You mentioned in the Q&A that funding for pre-commercial hard technical research and development is kind of faltering right now. What do you see as the future for that sort of funding?
I say government funding for it it's not great right now, right? I mean, it's been well publicized about, the NIH and, and the NSF seeing big cuts and DOE, all those agencies seeing big cuts. So that said, in some respects, it's also not a great environment for that kind of technology in venture capital either, just because there's, venture capitalists with, all apologies to anybody who is at the Wolverine Fund or knows one or whatever, but, they are definitely herd animals, like they all run to this side of the boat and they all run to that side of the boat. So right now we're all over here on the app side of the boat, right? and so for good reason, because a lot of people have, had been able to invest very little money and get great returns, and that's what they're all about. So it is not the easiest time for, hard engineering products. And that's just the way it is, and you have to be determined, and you have to develop a great network of contacts, and you have to have a fantastic pitch, and you have to be really smart about how you use your funding. That's kind of all there is, really.
Thank you.
Great. Great question. Let's have one more question. Who's it going to be?
Hi, my name is Densu. So I was wondering, you seem like you have a lot of connections with manufacturing facilities and things like that. But for people who are just starting off, like with an idea, how would we get connected to something like that large of a scale?
Are you asking about how do you learn what kind of manufacturing technology you need, or how do you find a contract manufacturer, or what?
Yeah, something like that. It seems weird because we're so young, and to go to like a facility and be like, hey, can you make 1,000 of these? You know what I mean?
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, for sure, there are plenty of companies, like right here in our area, there's a company called 3-Dimensional Services, and that's what they do. They help people make 1,000 of something. They've got Urgent Plastics is their, child company. So there are, resource books, and you can kind of go to a guy like Alan Peterson at 3-Dimensional Services, and especially around here, you can just sort of like Google on prototype shops, right? And you'll find a lot of them. There's one, oh gosh, there's another one, I can't remember the name of it, it's over in Jackson. But, in terms of like how do you get familiar with manufacturing technology in the broader sense, well, I'd just go take a class first, so I at least like knew what I was doing when I went into the plant. And then, seriously, go work in it for a couple of years if you really want to understand it. There's really no substitute for actually being in a plant and trying to install some equipment and, having somebody yell at you when you screw up. And, if you really, really want to understand it. If what you want is a prototype shop, there's lots of them around here, and people will be happy to help you figure out what you need to do to make your product.
Okay, thank you.
Don, really glad you came here. Best wishes with Aki, University of Michigan. Let's thank Don White for coming. Thank you.